The United States, with the tariffs that it's imposed, has disrupted the global trade system in a way that we've not seen in decades, right? You continue to say that most of the world's trade is still happening under WTO rules, but how much longer are these rules relevant if the United States, the world's biggest economy, isn't playing by them?
Thank you. It is indeed true that world trade has been disrupted in a way that it hasn't been in the past 80 years, eight decades, and we should acknowledge that. But it is true that when we do the analysis, we find that 72% of world trade is still taking place on World Trade Organization rules. So this means that almost 3/4 of world trade is still going on WTO rules. Yes, it's down from 80% pre-tariffs to now. We should remember the U.S. is 13% of world imports. Okay, so what is happening is this is possible because the rest of the world is not doing a tit-for-tat exchange with the U.S. They are not trying to retaliate in any way, which is good. It's good for global trade and global growth. They are also continuing to trade with each other on WTO terms. So this is why we have this. And I think it's a good thing for the world.
You say other countries are not retaliating, but what we're effectively seeing is them bowing down to US pressure. I give you an example of the European Union. The US-EU trade relationship is the biggest in the world. The EU has made the concession that the tariff deal that it struck with the US does not live up to WTO rules.
No, I wouldn't say that. Yes, the tariff deal is struck with all the unilateral, bilateral agreements with the U.S. are outside of the WTO rules. That is true. But as I said, there's the bulk of world trade of members with each other is continuing on WTO rules, and the fact they are not retaliating. Now remember this, it is much more complex than it seems. Because when these negotiations are going on, it's not only about trade. There are also security issues involved. There are issues about immigration. There are issues about drugs. There are so many other issues. There are issues about critical minerals. They're all factored into these bilateral negotiations in a way that the WTO cannot get in. So they're not all about WTO issues. That's what you need to understand. It's very complex. And that is why on a bilateral level, I would be careful in passing judgment because governments are dealing with a very difficult, complex situation. Okay, that being said, what we need to do is say, okay, for the rest of world trade that is taking place on WTO terms still, how do we make sure that we continue to build the resilience of the system, that members continue to honor the rules? And that's what we're focused on now. And we think that the best way to do that and to help to avoid too much fragility in the system is by focusing on the reforms. Okay, so the U.S. has criticized the system as having many problems and challenges, and I share some of those criticisms. I think some of them are correct.
We'll pick up on the reforms.
Developing countries have also criticized the system.
And I want to pick up on that point, but I just want to bring you back. You're talking about resilience in the system. The pandemic showed us that there is an overdependence on China for critical supplies. Now we're in this US tariff era. It shows us that many countries have a big dependency, countries in Africa as well, on the US as an export market. You've been talking about the global trade system and how we need to create supply chains in other parts of the world. How far is that effort going? Decentralizing the global supply chain.
Look, you've actually picked up on something that I've been saying constantly, that the world trading system was built for interdependence, not overdependence. And we see now overdependence on maybe the US for markets and on China for critical supplies. And you pointed out that during the pandemic, we found that it wasn't so resilient because of overdependence for vaccines. So that's why we are encouraging at the WTO the diversification of trade, the decentralization of supply chains, including to Africa. We need to add value to our products. Actually, that's what we're discussing right now at the G20 meeting. How do we create value chains on the African continent, sub-regionally, regionally, because that way we also create jobs for our young people, and that's what we need. So we are strongly behind that. We don't want overdependence, we want interdependence. That's the best thing for the system. By the way, Africa is not too dependent on the US market. Let me just point out that only 6% of Africa's exports go to the US, just 6%, and only 4% of our imports come from the US. That's why we are not as impacted by these tariffs. But there are some countries in Africa that are a select group of countries impacted, like South Africa, obviously, but the continent as a whole is not as impacted because we are not as integrated into US trade as all that.
Let's just talk about AI, because AI-related products are boosting global trade at the moment. You know the numbers better than I do. But the challenge is you've got this dominance of this tech race, of the AI race, China and the United States. Where does this leave the rest of the world?
We've actually done some good work at the World Trade Organization. A recent World Trade report shows that, AI could boost global trade by almost 40% by 2040. But that will happen if the adoption could be equitable, more equitable. If it doesn't happen equitably, then parts of the world fall behind. And that's what we want to avoid. But AI helps to reduce trade costs. And we're very keen that for developing countries, what we should focus on is how can we use those aspects of AI that will be very helpful to us, because trade costs on our continent are very high. And even among us, it costs us 20% more to trade with ourselves and to trade with the outside world. Perhaps the adoption of this would help. And what we're discussing here is how can partners in the G20 partner with African countries to make AI a good thing so that there's more equitable adoption. If we do that, it will benefit everyone.
Right.
If we don't, we have greater inequalities.
Okay, on that point then, we're speaking at the first G20 on African soil. And we're talking about artificial intelligence. These new technologies require critical minerals. Most or many of them are on the African continent. Are we going to see a repeat of the past where countries simply come and take raw materials out of this continent, leaving little beneficiation, little value add? It's not benefiting the people of the continent. I say this because we're almost entering a new era of trade. Globalization, for all that it's brought us, has left so many people behind. Are we going to see a repeat in this? And how does Africa position itself in the deals that you're seeing when it comes to critical minerals?
Well, it's how we position ourselves depend on us, right? And our policymakers. So if we continue to export, to see that 60% of our exports are commodities and raw materials, then things won't change. But I'm seeing a different mood here. African leaders are saying clearly that this has to change, that there has to be more value added on the continent. That South Africa has pushed for a G20 framework on critical minerals, which I think is a great initiative. And the whole idea is that let us add value to these critical minerals. We have 30% of the world's critical minerals on this continent.
Right.
We can go from raw materials all the way to finished product by creating sub-regional and regional value chains. Why is that so important? It's not just about adding value and therefore trading up and getting a greater share of world trade. It's about one thing that is important, creating jobs for our youth. We are going to have the largest youth population by 2050. In the world. We must create jobs for our young people, so we have to insist. And I think the model has to change. I think all African leaders are really agreeing on that now. I think the issue is to get the investment in. To do that, we must reduce barriers to investment and we must reduce costs to trade.
You've said in the past that if the WTO didn't exist, it would need to be invented. Who stands the most to lose if world trade rules are thrown out the window? If trade isn't governed by rules?
I think developing countries stand to lose most, because already the developed countries have improved the living standards of their people using this same trading system. Although 1.5 billion people have been lifted out of extreme poverty in developing countries, as you said, not all developing countries have benefited equally. Certainly, I don't think Africa has benefited as much as it should. So, we need to improve that. And I'm telling you all the ways we need to act. So if that ladder of using the world trading system is kicked away, guess what? Who is going to lose? We wouldn't have had our turn to try and benefit. So certainly we should fight to make sure that the system is kept in place, the rules are improved, but not the way it is. I insist that we need to reform. There are certain things in the world trading system that don't work well now, including for us. And we should focus on reforming those things.
And that brings me to my final question. There's all this talk of reforming the WTO. from where you sit, because you're championing this reform, you've been a strong advocate of this reform, what is the single thing that needs to be done to achieve the outcomes that would benefit everybody when it comes to global trade?
I wish it was a single thing. Life is not that simple. There's not one single thing. There are several things that
the most important
things that have to be done. Certainly, we need to look at what the developing countries are looking at. How can the system help them integrate better into world trade so they can benefit more? What is it? How can the trading system help development more than it is? That's first. How can we bring in investment? Second, how do we make decisions so that the system can be more flexible, allowing us to adopt new rules that may benefit developing countries faster and quicker? If we're in an AI world, you don't need a system that is rigid, right? You don't need a system that is bureaucratic. You need a flexible system that will enable us to move faster so that our young people can get into digital trade, green trade, services trade, the places where it matters. That's what I care about. So these are some of the things. You know, systemic change, so we are more flexible. Decision making that is quicker and enabling us to take advantage. Flexibility in our arrangements and agreements. More openness and transparency so we can see what trade policies are being made by other countries so that our business people can adapt quickly and be able to take advantage.
This is really my final question. Please indulge me, just my last one. What is your message to US President Donald Trump? Very few people knew what the WTO
I deal
did.
with the United States of America, and it is still a member of the WTO, and we value that. And we value all our members. What I'm saying to all our members is this. We must look at what are the good aspects of the world trading system and the rules that we need to keep. What are the things that need to be changed? How do we integrate Africa more? How do we help developing countries more? How do we help even the developed countries? Because, you know, they also need to look out for their populations. So that's why I'm advocating very strongly for these reforms. So my message to all my members is let's get together. And I have to tell you, this G20 meeting has been tremendous because all the world leaders, one by one yesterday, mentioned the centrality of the world trading system and the WTO to them.
Except for the US
president. You know, and they also mentioned the need to reform. You know, so this is very critical, and we will continue to work with them to do the reforms. Thank you.
Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, thank you so much.
Thank
I appreciate it.